All right. So as we're getting started, we want to quickly overview one of the tools that we're going to be using today. So as you're coming in, there's a link on our screen. If you just want to go to that link, we'll also post it in chat and jot down any questions you have. This link's going to bring you to an Easy Retro board where you will find a space to post ideas and thoughts related to communication ideas you hope we address, personal best practices for collaborative writing, challenges you faced, and any comments or questions that you might have. So the Easy Retro board may look a little different depending on how you connect it to it. On your computer screen, you're going to see something like this. Looking at the columns, you can use the plus sign at the top of each column to add new questions. You can also upvote questions or comments and add comments to anything that interests you. And you can do that by either clicking the thumbs up or clicking the comment bubble. Those will allow you to either comment or, again, thumbs up something to draw more attention to it. On a phone, it's going to look a little different. So you'll see something like this, and you can toggle between the different topic areas just by using the drop-down menu. Again, to add a comment or to add a comment or question, just click on the plus sign in the relevant column, type your idea and click share. You can also upvote and comment on existing thoughts or questions from your phone as well. So that's the basics there. And now I'm going to hand it off to Julie to get us started.
Great. Thanks, Brandy, and welcome to everyone coming in today. So as Brandy mentioned, we're really talking about tips and resources to help you write more successfully in these collaborative teams. And this is really going to help us cover the team science landscape. So Brandy and I both work at the Renaissance Computing Institute at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And today's workshop is part of RENCI's Accelerating Collaborative Team Science Group, or ACTS. And so we have an ongoing webinar series that hopefully some of you will join in the future. As I mentioned, my name is Dr. Julie Horvath. I'm a senior research scientist here at RENCI, and my research really focuses on comparative and evolutionary research, looking at primate genomes and their microbiomes. And I approach my collaborative research through participatory science, where I really engage diverse academic and government scientists, as well as the public in a lot of this research. And so I use team science principles in multiple projects. And so this is relative, what we're going to be talking about is really related to a lot of the work that I already do. So I'm going to hand it back to you, Brandy, so you can introduce yourself.
All right. I'm Brandy Farlow. I am a research proposal and documentation specialist at RENCI, so I work on the comms team. But I'm also currently pursuing my PhD in leadership, and I'm kind of focusing on components of collaborative team leadership and its applications to science teams. All right. Julie, go ahead and take it back.
All right, so today we'd like this to be a little bit of discussion. So we're definitely going to give you some insight from us, but we'd also like to hear your thoughts throughout. And so we'll let you know when we're looking for some of your thoughts. But first off, we'd really like to hear from all of you, because we put information about or introduced who we are, and I'll put my name and info in the chat. So if you could just type in the chat a little bit about, your name, location, maybe a little bit about your research that you do and what level you are, that would be really awesome. So everybody can kind of get to know each other. And so just things to think about. If you have a specific question that's really specific to and relevant to what we're talking about, please put that in the chat so we can address it. If you have something that's more broad, then we ask that you put that in the Easy Retro board. So you can put in comments and links, and then other people can actually go in and upvote that and comment on that. So towards the end, we can address some of the Easy Retro questions. So again, if you can just introduce yourself in the chat right now, that'd be awesome. And if you have any specific questions, you can also put those in chat. So Jess, who's here joining us, is going to help us manage some of the chat. So keep us on track whenever we see something in the chat that's relevant to what we're talking about. We can get to that. But otherwise, please use that Easy Retro board. All right. So I'm going to hand it back to Brandy so you can overview what we're doing today.
All right. So before we get started, just a sneak peek through our agenda. Today we'll be discussing everyone's collaborative writing experiences. We'll cover the process, best practices, and authorship concerns attached to collaborative writing pursuits. But we'll also address accessibility concerns in collaborative writing for different groups that may be involved. And we'll move into a discussion about generative AI, following it up talking about key considerations during collaborative writing. So together just going to work through a best practices document and really try to make sure that we all have a good understanding of ideas about how to work effectively to collaborate. All right, Julie, back to you.
Thank you. All right. So as we talk about collaborative writing, this is really important because for some of you, maybe writing is a challenge, others, maybe it comes more easily, but just knowing that when you bring together a group of people, that adds additional logistics. So while it's really great because you're getting new perspectives and new ideas when you bring in more people to collaborative writing, it also, brings some additional challenges because that sometimes means you have to take more time to get things done. You have to be a little bit more prepared because you have to bring everybody on board, make sure you're communicating well, and really find a way to make everything come together. So it's also great to have somebody who's point person or leader on maybe certain parts or the whole topic so that you can really get your submission to come together on time. So we'll cover some of this. And again, as we go through, we'd love to hear your insight and input as well. So we'd love to hear from you if you have some good points too. And I think Brandy's going to give us an example of some of her challenges she's had in the process.
Absolutely. So I told you I spend a lot of time on our communications team. In fact, I do a lot of the editing at Rensi. Understanding and documenting the processes for collaborative writing can alleviate a lot of frustration. So for instance, I worked in a project where consistency was absolutely required by our funding agency, actually. And it really should be. When you're writing documents, they should be consistent. I created a set of standards to follow based on the feedback that we had all received. I carefully documented it, and I trained everybody that I could on those standards. Unfortunately, as you know, projects are full of change. The team changes, the necessities change, and as we move forward in the project, the documentation was forgotten. But also we were in a rush sometimes, and in a rush to get things out the door when planning just wasn't quite adequate. We started skipping steps, which included the editor, right? And pushing things out the door. We got things done, but we spent a lot of time and trouble and reworking things later because the language wasn't consistent or we had missed phrasing that they asked us to use in the past, right? Um, and this was all just because we'd skipped out on our own processes. We had the processes in place. We just forgot to use them. Um, it created a lot of frustration and a lot of unnecessary rework on that project. I think Julie also has one that she was going to tell you about, so I'll go ahead and hand it back to her.
Yes, thanks. So I've definitely worked on some large collaborative grants and writing topics. And so one of the challenges I've had is in working with Google Docs. So probably a lot of you have used Google Docs. And, as somebody's adding a piece or a sentence, that might move down some of the other sentences below it. And so sometimes I'll be working in the middle of a document and somebody will delete a whole page or a paragraph, and that means things skip around. And so sometimes that's challenging because it's hard to know where you're typing, and then sometimes you end up typing in the wrong place. So that's definitely one of the challenges as multiple people work in a document, and just something to keep in mind. But I will give you a flip side. So some of the benefits of that is recently I was working on a really large collaborative grant, and there were 3 of us working simultaneously in a document. And so as things shifted around, we also realized that one person was kind of putting in just really broad ideas. And then another one of us went in and wrote some of those out in short bullets and some short sentences. But the third person was really good as the editor role, like Brandy was talking about, and really pulled some of those sentences together and finished them out. And so the 3 of us kind of worked in a team on getting some of the ideas in and then finessing them so that they actually flowed really well. So it worked really great that we were all working in this document simultaneously because we could kind of work through, we could add in little comments and say, hey, Julie, can you add this? Or what do you think of that? And then we could in real time work on that. So sometimes, collaborative writing adds some challenges, but I also really want you to just notice that sometimes it's really beneficial. So there's some really good things to think about as well. So Brandy, if you can go to the next slide, I think we wanted to see if you guys had any good collaborative writing experiences you wanted to talk about. So maybe some challenges you've had, but also maybe some positive benefits that you've also experienced. And so what we ask is that you can raise your hand if you want to share and unmute, and then we'll call on you. If you want to just put something in the chat, we'd love to hear from you as well. So either some of your challenges that you've faced or some of the benefits that you've had working in collaborative writing documents. So does anybody want to share some of their thoughts and experiences with collaborative writing? give you a couple minutes if you want to come in here, but Brandy, I don't know if you have an idea you want to share while people are thinking and see if we get any.
Yeah,
additional-
something that I always consider is getting people to work on deadlines. It's hard to get people to work under deadlines, especially when we're in these crunch time environments and you're relying on other people to input their ideas too. You have your own projects and responsibilities. They have their own projects and responsibilities. And that idea of how we get everybody working towards a deadline together can be really tough. I think sometimes it's helpful to have someone aligned to collect documents on time to really drive the process. We thankfully are fortunate enough to have a project manager who can do that for us sometimes. But even in the absence of a project manager, just having one person assigned to kind of driving those processes, it can be really helpful. So, but I do see a hand now, and I'd love to have some input here. So Tanya, it looks like I hope that's correct. Tanya Brown?
Yes, that's correct. Thank you. I was just going to share from my personal experience with our project is when we're writing. So, for instance, we were writing a recent major paper. The biggest challenge was towards the end when we were kind of that last 10% where we'd done a couple rounds of revisions, and we were closing in on finalizing. And I think two things is, when do you define something as completely done? And to have everyone, like, there's always going to be that last edit or that last correction, and everyone's definition of what the perfect product is going to be different. So where do you draw that line? And the other thing is just making decisions around which comments get accepted and which don't. So it's more of like the governance around the overall leadership of a paper is also challenging, especially when you have multiple senior authors involved. So that's from my experience. Thank you.
Yeah, and I kind of heard two things there. So one was an authorship question, and we are going to definitely address that. The other one was how to know when a document is done. That one's a difficult one. And I would tell you, everybody does have different opinions about when documents are done. I guess having an established process and set deadlines kind of lets you know when you have to move those things on, even if it's just a deadline you created. So like, let's say we're submitting to a journal and the journal doesn't have a deadline for me to submit under, but I set deadlines for my team instead that drive the process. So I need everybody to have their edit or their input done on this date. The document is then locked. The editor is going to go in on this date. The editor will be done on this date. There's a final review by a person in charge on this date. We're moving it forward. That tells everybody what their deadlines are. And at that point, they have to be done then. Will you still have people hanging out in your document trying to edit it after that? Absolutely. Unless you hard kick everybody out, it's going to happen. It's one of the challenges, but it does provide people nice guidelines, and sometimes that's really beneficial. All right. Do we have any other examples that anybody thought about?
I saw some questions in the chat.
Oh, perfect.
Looks like Aja has some questions about people not always respecting deadlines for the content and how do you deal with that? And I think that goes back to one of the comments Brandy said, is that sometimes people aren't respecting deadlines. Sometimes they just get really busy and forget about them too. And so it's always really helpful to have a person who goes in as a project manager or just one of the leaders of the group to kind of send out reminders and try to get in touch with the people who aren't meeting those deadlines and ask them to add in their thoughts and comments. We'll talk a little bit about the end when we get to authorship, so that might cover that as well. Brandy, do you want to add anything to that thought?
I was just going to add this idea about saying people not respecting deadlines. I would encourage a rethink on that phrasing. I think a lot of times it's not that people aren't respecting a deadline, which seems like a really negative idea, so much as like they don't have time or they're busy with other things that are priorities, or they just need a reminder. And so I would really encourage reframing that discussion. That's just a personal idea there. So. Because I often think it's not the case that people are trying. So, all right. Anything else from anyone? All right, we're going to move forward. So to work effectively, teams working on collaborative documents need to adhere to many of the same practices that just promote general good teamwork. So this includes ideas like setting clear goals and rules, That is, you need to know who is responsible for what and plan how and when the document moves between these individuals efficiently, right? So that idea of somebody driving the process and having a set process and deadlines. The next one is ensuring good communication. Things like Slack, email, document comments, tracked edits. And then dictate a process for who resolves these and how the changes are enacted, how you decide when a section of a document is complete or the whole document, right? These are parts of communication with your team that you definitely need preset rules for because they make things work a lot more smoothly. Next is creating a mechanism for feedback. Some of this will figure into communication practices, but it also relates to ensuring that the group has an agreed upon and appropriate process for collaborative planning, correcting errors, and ensuring alignment with the project's goals. Additionally, it is crucial that when you are working on a document collaboratively, you ensure that everybody agrees and understands that no edit is personal. People can be really attached to the ways that they phrase things and their ideas just in general. And very few people like having their ideas changed or erased, right? That idea of somebody is harming or changing my baby can be very hard. But the thing is, if you establish trust with your writing team and you have shared goals, it does make it a little easier to accept that the changes that are happening are meant for the good of the team. They're not personal. They're intended to make the document better reflect the group's goals and ideas and make sure everyone is on the same page. The next one is going to be have a process to resolve conflicts. Even the most functional teams are going to disagree on occasion. Ensure that you have a process to swiftly address conflicts in a manner that is respectful of all individuals involved. This may lean on team rules, right? Final decisions about language might be made by the editor. Final decisions about data processes are made by a data scientist. Final decisions about an appropriate project timeline are made by leadership. Beyond these situations, though, conflict resolution has to rely on establishing protocols to resolve disagreements while ensuring that team members feel heard and supported. The next thing you need to worry about is ensuring time management. Set deadlines and be sure everyone in the group is aware of them. This is not just the submission deadline, okay? This is other key deadlines in the process too. Think about your initial draft deadline, editing and review deadlines, a deadline for having all sources in the document and properly cite it, and another for ensuring that they're checked for accuracy and mistakes. This timeline should ensure that each person has appropriate time to do their job in any part of the process. It should be documented in a location where anyone can access it. It should be managed so that it is updated if there is needs. And this could include having somebody like a leader, a project manager, if you're lucky, or someone else on the project, sending out notifications and reminders to responsible team members. I'm an editor, so oftentimes this involves just multiple reminders, including an advance notice that the work is coming, a notice that the work is ready for me to look at, a reminder close to the deadline, and maybe another reminder when we get even closer to the deadline, or hey, Brandy, this is due today. I kind of need it. Have you touched it yet? Right? Because we all get busy. It should also be expected that I respond to these notifications. So if somebody says, hey, Brandy, I have something coming, I should at least thumbs up the Slack notification on it or send a message back saying, hey, I'm working on this. It's coming. Okay. So that the person who's managing the process actually also knows that I'm aware of it and has some insight to where I am. I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Judy said, I'm joining this meeting as a project manager for grants and publications. I'm hoping to gain tips and tricks. Okay, awesome. We're glad to have you with us. It's very nice when people have project managers that can help them with stuff. It can be very helpful with a lot of these. So the next thing, agreeing to rules of engagement prior to working on any project or entering into any team meeting can be highly beneficial. So one of RENCI's projects, the Biodata Catalyst, actually uses the rules of engagement that are on the screen, right? These are called the Santa Cruz Rules of Engagement. So do not shy away from identifying problems and risks. Be candid, be heard, be polite. If you are a talker, give space for others to talk. Add comments and ideas to shared documents if you do not find space to talk. Okay. Personal comment here. On a writing project, this might also just be leaving notes in a meeting agenda or simply using the comment feature or track changes in a document. You may not always find a place to speak, but that does not invalidate your ideas, right? Make sure others on your team understand that you value and support these additions as well, but also make sure to convey your ideas so that they are considered in the final document product. So I'm going to hand this over to Julie now. Julie's going to actually discuss the one thing that everybody wants to know about, right? Authorship.
Yes, thanks, Brandy. We did have a question already about authorship. I do see some other questions in the chat. So some of those questions we'll try to get to, and some of them are going to be relevant to other things we're talking about. So authorship is definitely a challenge. Discuss authorship early is our main recommendation. So everybody who's going to be part of this project, talk about what their roles are and what their responsibilities are. And so you can try and give them credit. So we have a link to this table here, and this is a table that we borrowed from Wiley. And so it looks very basic, but if everyone can, put in their contribution, people list what their level of contribution is on different parts of whatever your project is. So you'd put in, the writing, idea generation, etc. You can make this specific to what the topics are on the project you're working on, and then you have everybody write in their contribution so that you get an idea of what everybody feels is important and what they included. And so this is really important because then as you start out, you kind of know where everybody's role is. People who say they want to contribute a lot, then maybe they can take the lead on things. People who don't want to contribute as much, maybe they'll be a middle author or in a different place in authorship. And so then once you start working on this, then you've kind of outlined who your leaders on different sections might be. But then we also recommend that you go back and revisit the authorship, because you can look back at that table and see, oh, well, this person said they wanted to contribute a lot, but we never saw them at any meetings or they didn't write anything. And so that's also really useful to know, okay, maybe we need to revisit this authorship idea toward the end of the project to just really realize who we're going to give credit to and how. And then there are multiple ways to give credit. So with a publication, you can put people as different authors, and first author often gets more credit in biological sciences. And so maybe you'll have co-first authors or maybe co-last authors. In a grant writing, definitely it's somebody who's the PI or co-PI versus key personnel versus, maybe just named on the grant. And so depending on what your role is, you can figure out what level different people should be at. Yeah. And so
there something in the chat.
Sure.
Somebody mentioned that they have a contribution matrix with a tri-level effort rating, which is pretty awesome. So that is another way of doing it. Sorry, Julie, didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, not at all. You're good. So I think definitely contribution and authorship is going to be important. And so what we're going to go to next, actually, I think is going to address some of the comments in the chat, but hopefully we'll get back to some of those if we didn't really address them. So next we want to look at looking at best practices. And so our goal for this workshop was to give you some thoughts and ideas and some of our experiences, have you share some of yours, but also really to have this best practices document that all of you can go to and maybe add your ideas to, so that anybody who goes to this workshop can take this document at the end and use this as a resource. And so what we'd like to do now is have all of you either give us some of your thoughts and ideas by raising your hand or typing in the chat, or by going to this link that Jess just put in the document, the chat. And this is our best practices document. So right now, this best practices document covers some of the topics we've already talked about. So goals and roles, how you communicate. This gets into some of the technologies that we use to communicate. So at Rensi, we use Slack. I use it hourly, basically at Rensi, but Discord is also very similar, and there are other ways to communicate in addition to email. And there are other technologies that you can use for writing. So for example, we talked about Google Docs. There are definitely some other technologies as well. So what we put in this best practices document are some of these main thoughts. And then what we'd love for you to do is, if you have any resources you could add, we would love for you to add those resources. This should be editable. So you can just go in and go ahead and edit that. And so, like I said, we can add in some additional references. And then if you put something in the chat, we can add that into this document if you're not able to. And then this will be a document that any of you can access towards the end of this session, or maybe in the future. And then you have this as a good resource. So I see a number of people have already gone into this document. So like I said, if you are comfortable and if you had things to add, if you have some resources you want to put in here, please feel free to go in and add that. At the bottom is our authorship chat. And so that's where we have a link to the Wiley credit down here. So if you want to add a new comment, feel free to add in some points at the very bottom. If you want to add a resource or a link or something to one of the topics we already have, please add that above. So our thought was we're going to give you about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more, just depending on how much people work in here, and go ahead in and add in some of your comments or resources. If you have questions and you're looking for resources, you can go ahead and type in the chat or raise your hand, and we'll try to address some of those questions. And then, like I said, Brandy and I will add in some more resources after the fact, after this workshop, so we can add in some other resources.
And please too, if you're not comfortable typing in there, feel free to raise your hand, type it in chat, whatever you want to do. We're very receptive to how anybody wants to participate in this exercise. We just think it's really beneficial for the community to collect best practices together. So what are you doing versus what we're doing? These are our suggestions and definitely things that we use. But the best thing about team science is everybody's ideas coming together for the benefit of the whole, right? So I am hoping that everybody feels comfortable adding to this.
I see some people adding, so that's great. See, I don't know if we want to look back at the chat. See what other questions we have here. Yeah, so how do you encourage people to use tools like Slack if they're not technologically inclined? That is a challenge. I definitely have some teams who work very well in Slack, others who don't. And so there are a lot of tutorials. So I would just recommend, hey, here are some tutorials, maybe give them some highlights, maybe go in and talk to them and give them your own little tutorial so you can work with them on some of those points just to get them comfortable with it. If you start using it more, then people get more comfortable as they start using it. So, maybe find ways. We have a writing session that we're doing with a collaborative group, and we send emails, but we also send Slack messages. And so we're trying to get people to move into Slack. So like I said, we're using both email and Slack, but we're encouraging people to go into Slack and have some discussion there. So we're kind of moving slowly, migrating our thoughts and ideas into that Slack chat so that we can get more people excited about it.
I'd also say creating a community around it, right? We at Renzi, we use Slack as everything from communicating about project updates to like checking in on a coworker to we have like even just a Slack chat that's like basically a coffee room. Go in and chat with your coworkers, right? These things are beneficial because then there's a community built around Slack. So it's not just a just for business. It's also like engaging. It's things that people want to actually be involved in. There's a lot of pet pictures in there, which definitely makes me want to go back, right? So these are like creating that community there is definitely a way to really build up how much people want to use it. And then I see the other comment in here, good management software that keeps track of progress and action items. Gary mentioned they use Smartsheet, but wondered if anybody else had other software they found useful. Julie did mention at Renzi, we use Monday.com for pretty much everything. We track a lot of stuff in there. It sends out automatic emails to people and actually can be even integrated into Slack. So I get a Slack reminder or Slack notification every time somebody tags me on Monday, so I know to go look at things. It comes through to my email too, which is super useful, but my email is usually inundated, so the Slack notification helps out a lot.
Yeah, Brandy, can you zoom in more on the doc because it is a little bit small? Awesome, thank you.
Super sorry about that. I refreshed it and it went smaller again.
It's good now.
So for conflict resolution, do you go outside of the team to other leadership as the final voice? Sometimes it really depends. It's really good to try and actually a good team building to try and resolve a conflict internally to the team. But sometimes you do need external help, right? And if there's no ability to resolve without frustration, going to an outside source can also be really beneficial. I love some of the ideas I'm seeing added into this document.
This is great.
Right, we'll give a couple more minutes so you guys can continue to add some things, and then we're gonna kind of move forward in our presentation. Judy said to encourage Slack, I set up writing groups and set up a time weekly within Slack that the writing group has meaningful exchange for the manuscript, such as Tuesdays from 2 to 4 p.m. It seems to get the group tuned in at least on that day. That's an excellent suggestion, and actually something that Julie and I were just talking about with one of our groups is a weekly engagement of that type.
Yeah, thanks, Judy. I like that. Yeah, so tips like that'll be really useful. So if you want to put those in the chat or put them in the document, like I said, we're going to work on this document more and put in some other additional topics, but you are all welcome to add this. So we have a new one from Robert Clark about tracking changes in version control. Certainly, there are definitely multiple ways to track changes. So, when we're working in Google Docs, we often ask everybody to go in as a suggestion mode so that we can see what changes they've made. And then one person goes through as the editor. So usually Brandy is our editor, and she'll go through and accept some of those. But if she makes changes, then I'll usually go through and accept her changes. And so it's kind of just we work together as a team and note how we do that. And then, for version control, we do sometimes have to go back and look at previous versions to go back and see, oh, what did we change? And maybe we didn't like this, or we need to go back to some of our older options to take back some of our ideas that we took out potentially.
I'd also mention, if you're not using Google Docs, which a lot of people don't, let's say you're using SharePoint, just make sure you have a really robust naming convention for your documents, right? So this may be, collaborative writing. So we're doing our collaborative writing workshop. Okay, so this is collaborative writing workshop version 1. It's on 10/24 of 24, right? So I'm going to add the details in so that when I see collaborative writing workshop version 2 and there's a different date by it, or let's say I forgot to leave the date, there's a version 2, or I forgot to leave the version, there's a date, right? Just make sure there's a robust naming structure behind them, and then a robust file structure so that people can find and locate the things that they need, including the older versions.
Yes.
I like that. This is definitely something that should go in this best practices document, by the way. I find it makes me nervous, or makes nervous collaborative writers more comfortable letting others edit if there's a parking lot at the bottom of a document where pieces of discarded text can be saved. We actually, Julie and I specifically do that a lot. Most of our documents have some kind of parking lot. It's a very great call out. Thank
I haven't
you.
called it a parking lot, but I like that.
Yes.
Should put that in at the bottom. Yeah. So great ideas. I mean, I think this is great to get you guys putting some ideas here, and then we'll bring as many of these as possible over into that best practices document so that everybody can access this after the fact. Yeah, keep it coming. Love it.
All right, so I think for the sake of time, I'm going to move us back over to our main discussion, but please continue to add your thoughts to that as we go. And even in the days following, the link will stay the same. The document will be there. Please feel free to use it, feel free to add to it, and take what you need from it. So our next consideration is going to be accessibility and awareness of individual backgrounds in collaborations. These are important considerations on any team, and ensuring people are on the same page with regards to issues related to these is very essential. So one of the things to remember is that teams that represent a wide range of academic and personal backgrounds can improve and promote innovation due to the different views and ideas produced by different life experiences, learning, and views. These differences can strengthen a team and promote creativity, generate new ideas, and help us think about the same scenario uniquely. They can also help encourage experimenting with new processes, but the differences between us, including differences in access, academic background, and beyond, can also be a blocker to team processes if they're not handled properly and appropriately. So these issues are definitely an important consideration. So to integrate good team writing pursuits, consider and agree upon. I'm jumping ahead of myself. I am so sorry. Consider and agree upon a statement of conduct. One of RENCI's project, also the Biodata Catalyst, which I did mention earlier, has a great statement of conduct. It states the Biodata Catalyst Consortium is dedicated to providing harassment-free experience for everyone, regardless of gender, gender identity and expression, age, sexual orientation, disability, physical appearance, body size, race, or religion, or lack thereof. We do not tolerate harassment of community members in any form. Sexual language and imagery is generally not appropriate for any venue, including meetings, presentations, or discussions. So I think that's a really good thing to remember. Also build an inclusive environment. Fostering an environment that is respectful and emphasizes the value of each team member, empowers them to contribute and promotes open dialogue. Avoiding bias is very important, and if any microaggressions arise, work to resolve them quickly. This also makes sure that the science and all its products are accessible to all parties wishing to engage. Accessibility is a huge issue when it comes to dealing with science. So make sure your stuff is accessible to everybody. Respect perspectives, build competence, and engage the community. We all come to the research community with unique training, experiences, and backgrounds that produce our views and approaches in research. Embrace these viewpoints and approaches to problem solving. Encourage discussions that incorporate a variety of academic perspectives and approaches. Also, seek input, feedback, and collaboration from communities impacted either by your research or by its research products to ensure accessibility, relevance, and perspective on how it may impact either intentionally or unintentionally those individuals, right? Consider a study on blind individuals. It should likely include input on the study design and any written documentation or research products from the blind, right? A sighted person does not have the same perspective on how the research impacts the blind that a blind person would. So they might be able to discuss this more meaningfully and help you see perspectives that you might not have considered. So as such, just make sure if you're writing about a given community that you include perspective from those with lived experience there. And then also please acknowledge all individuals who contributed to your written products. Acknowledge the contributions, perspectives, and scientific interactions and impact from various communities and individuals involved in or impacted by your research. Consider calling out accessibility or related concerns in the group, promoting an accessibility-oriented mindset for those who review your writing as well. Okay. So now I'm going to hand it off to Julie, and Julie is going to talk about generative AI.
Yes. So generative AI is now very commonplace, is in discussions, and definitely has some benefits. So I've seen a lot of people, a lot of my colleagues use it. I've used it as well. And so just keep in mind that the rules and policies vary by institution. So UNC Chapel Hill has some guidelines on what's acceptable and what isn't. Federal guidelines might be different, and definitely other institutions probably have their own guidelines. So if you're writing for a journal, you might want to look at the journal guidelines. So definitely keep in mind what is acceptable and what isn't for whatever venue you are writing toward, and just keep aware of all those because they often do change. And so some of the benefits of generative AI, it can really enhance productivity. So I've seen people kind of type in, to one of the prompts, like, hey, I'm looking for information about collaborative writing and team science. What are some of the best practices? And so you'll get an output for some of that information. So it's one way to just generate some ideas and think through, oh yeah, I want to talk about this more, or think about that more. I've also seen people take all their notes and have generative AI just kind of compile the notes together. So a great way to kind of get some of your thoughts and ideas merged together. So can be great for brainstorming, great for other things. Sometimes it can provide edits, sometimes can detect problems. So definitely very useful in a manner of multiple different aspects. But the flip side is that there often can be some concerns or ethical issues. So if you have generative AI taking a part in, idea generation or writing pieces, then who gets authorship? Who does that get attributed to? And then if it's incorrect, then who does that fall back on for, making sure that everything is correct? So just keep that in mind, that if you're using generative AI, you want to double check everything, make sure what you're using is accurate, because sometimes there'll be some biases and inaccurate data that get pulled in. But also keep in mind that if you're giving something to a generative AI model, you don't want to give anything that's private or any data that's sensitive. So you want to make sure to keep all of that really, really sensitive information behind. So just give things that you're willing for the whole world to know about. So just keep that in mind. So generative AI has definitely been talked about in terms of, well, maybe it's going to displace certain jobs because it's going to take over certain roles. So again, another challenge. I don't think we're there at that level right now, but definitely something to think about as generative AI kind of moves through the mainstream and maybe goes into different avenues and is used in different ways. So again, some benefits and some concerns. And I wanted to leave you with an example that we found recently. So earlier in March of this year, there was a publication that came out. It was a peer-reviewed publication, and here's an excerpt from that. So this paper was later retracted because there were multiple concerns, and one of those was the use of generative AI. So you can see here highlighted, this text is, I'm very sorry, but I don't have access to real-time information or patient-specific data as I am an AI language model. So this went through the peer review process. This got published with this statement in this abstract. And so just something to keep in mind, if you're using generative AI, you want to make sure you're double checking everything and you're not getting this through the whole process and it gets published because you really want this to be something that you're in control of. And so, like I said, this did get retracted later, but it still is out there and probably isn't the only time that this has happened. So again, just some concerns to think about. So make sure you're using it wisely. I'm going to hand it back to Brandy to talk about some other considerations and processes.
Just as a little side note from the editor, AI does not edit well. It edits acceptably, but please don't rely on it for all of your editing. That's my personal input there. So key considerations and processes. So if we want to talk about planning your time, there's a lot of important things to consider here. Provide time for all individuals to participate without skipping steps. Remember that thing that I mentioned at the beginning, we skipped steps and things went through. Be aware of their schedules, conflicting needs and other workloads. Very important. Also, dividing rules during writing. Consider the individuals that you need to have involved. This includes anything from subject experts to researchers, science or technical writers, someone who can edit and bring the many contributing voices to a place where it sounds cohesive, right? It may also include anyone who needs to plan, read, or provide comments on the paper before it's finalized. Work out a schedule before you even get started with these, including these individuals. Again, be considerate of the time that they need to do their jobs. You don't want to rush somebody on a paper, especially not when it's something really important, right? Understand that the other tasks that they have on their plate when you're doing this scheduling. The next thing, document management. Documents are only useful if they're findable and readable, and maybe if people can view when things change, right? So we kind of touched on this earlier, but because of this, it's really good to consider versioning control, how a team manages different versions. I talked a little bit about those naming conventions that can help with that. Also findability, right? How do you uniquely name your document? Again, that naming convention, right? So everyone that can find it. So you could use the naming conventions that I talked about, things like dates and project names and document names and versions. But you can also create a really robust file structure that incorporates these ideas so that people can just drill down in files. I find that either one can be really useful, depending on the person, but usually a project team will include people with a preference towards each. So maybe consider combining things to make it easiest on the maximum number of people. The next one, comments and track changes. Be sure to use comments and track changes. I actually prefer these be used for different things. I generally encourage track changes for edits and comments for like conceptual concerns and questions or noting references early on. Things that aren't just an easy, like quick, I'm going to change a word here or, edit this sentence to sound a little bit better. And if you're talking about conceptual changes, put them in a comment. Track changes for edits, right? I also generally encourage people to document lock for editing. When you reach the final stage of editing, consider locking the document to the group. This ensures that whoever is actually doing the final review of your document is reading the final document, right? That's kind of important. So for us, this could be two things. Sometimes that is big, bold red letters at the top of the document saying this document is being edited and changes are not allowed. This is informal. People can still go into the document. They can still make changes. it's not courteous to do so, and the note is there to tell them they should not, right? And we hope that people respect these. Generally, it's mixed. Generally, it's mixed, but a lot of times they do. And then a more formal lock, for instance, in Google Docs, you can move all contributors to the view only, and just leave the ones who are responsible for that final review and final edit as editors on the document. This makes it so people can see the changes, but they actually cannot actually edit the document. So if you have a lot of people that like to get in and change things at the last minute, it's really good to do that kind of lock. All right. So the other thing, we have different challenges that we deal with when we are working on documents together. That could be geographic differences, right? We're currently bridging one of those now. We have people from all over in here, which is actually pretty neat. Realistically, technology is a great way to handle geographic considerations and challenges for collaboration. But you do still need to consider things like time zones and language concerns that may be related. And then on the language concerns, there are vocabulary differences, even if you're writing in English, you know, or the same language, depending on where you're at, right? If you are all writing in the same language, there's still going to be differences in spelling or diction. There's discipline-specific vocabulary that may need to be shared and used, especially if you're working on teams that go across the sciences, right? And then there's something called polysemy, and this is when a common term represents different but really related ideas. So if we think about the concept of a cell in biology versus a cell in programming language or an Excel sheet, these are all different concepts and they really are related to the same thing. So the definitions could kind of like, you could kind of understand what somebody else is talking about based on it. But if you haven't heard that, and I mean, cell is a very simplistic term, but these concepts do exist across the sciences and beyond. So just being cognizant of those differences in language and how people use them, but also realizing that there are additional complications when you work with a general population that you definitely need to understand when you're writing them. Very important. So I'm gonna, move this forward and I'm gonna hand it over to Julie.
Awesome. Thanks again, Brandy. All right, so we are almost done with the portion that we put together for you guys today. So we'd like to move into the question and answer. And I know I saw some chat questions come through, and I think we tried to answer most of them. If we missed them, please go ahead and put them back in chat or raise your hand and we'll try to address them, or go into the Easy Retro board and we can add in some additional questions there and try to address some of those. So yeah, so we have,
you know, we are short on time, so, but we will do the best that we can.
yeah, and we can potentially, you know, if you have a question and we don't get to it here, we can try and go into that Easy Retro board later and send out some information in the future if that is something we need to get to. So it looks like Anna also has an example here. So creating a nomenclature file prior to starting writing so that everybody's consistent across different components in this large file for, you know, topics, abbreviations, etc. So another great example that we can probably add into our best practices. All right. So Brandy, I don't know if you want to tackle any of these questions, if we want to tackle these in Easy Retro. If anybody has any questions they want us, you know, burning questions we didn't get to or new questions that have arisen, feel free to put those in the chat here. We can kind of talk about some of these. So the first one here, how do you determine who is a contributor or author as opposed to listing everyone on the project? And so that gets kind of back to that authorship discussion that we talked about. And so having everybody at the outset of a project type in what their contribution is or what they want their contribution to be, and then revisit that towards the end of the project, because, you know, depending on what the project is, if it's a manuscript versus a grant, you can figure out, you know, who's going to be the lead writers, lead authors versus a PI, co-PI, etc. And so that's really good to revisit it not only in the beginning, but also revisit it towards the end, just to make sure everybody's on the same page, whether they get into the author list versus the acknowledgements, etc.
I see a really nice question in chat right now, so I'm just going to highlight that. What if the project and its shape evolves so that it is no longer what it started as? This kind of thing happens, right? And I think the best thing I can tell you at those points is that is then a new project and a new meeting, right? Where, like, yes, we have, we're in the middle of a writing process and we have started putting the document together, right? But if the project has changed enough that it is not the same thing it started as, you need to sit and have a new meeting and start with the process again. What do we need? When do we need it? Who's involved, right? Do we have the right people involved at this point? Do we even have the right information at this point, right? Have a new meeting, start your planning. Again, you may be able to work through parts of that planning process a lot more fluidly this time because a lot of it is already in place, right? But you really do need to go back to the basics with that group to make sure that you guys are all heading the same direction. I think that's really important. Get everybody on the same page so you're working towards the same goal, right? Julie, did you have something to add?
Well, I was going to add that I did have a manuscript I was working on, and started out with one person who was doing a lot of the analysis and a lot of the writing. That person graduated and left. And so they were meant to be the primary author on that. And after they left, then somebody else had to take over and redo a lot of the analyses and redo a lot of the writing. And so then we had to revisit that authorship order. And so we went back to that original person who was first author and said, hey, would you be willing to share first authorship? Because this now has really changed and morphed into something different. So it's still a manuscript that we want to publish, and talk about our research, but that definitely changed. And so it just required discussion towards the second half. Yeah. Yeah, so there's, advising on consensus groups. So there might be a core author group, but there's also a whole group who might be co-author. So are you thinking like more of a consortium? And so you like talk about, instead of having individual authors, you have like a consortium and then everybody's a member of the consortium equally. I've definitely seen papers like that. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Jody. If you want to.
A little bit different. So we have a research project where we are talking to a bunch of people who we envision as collaborators. We are summarizing what we're doing and then putting that into a document, which we hope that other people will co-author as, agreeing, yes, this is the way things are, right? And so there it's very it's not a team science oriented collaborative writing project where we're going to, hey, let's author something. It's more, I mean, we've been talking to people, they've been a piece of this, but because it's scientists, it's not in, a sort of traditional interview study, but more like these people are potentially co-authoring a document that we will produce, and then everyone will have at it. And so I'm wondering if you have sort of advice on how to make those work or where to go look for best practices.
So great question. I don't know that I have some specific best practices for that. I think that's something we'll try and put into our best practices document. So we can add some of those points in. I was going to say some of these other points we're probably going to add into the best practices document after today. I don't have experience with what you're talking about, Brandy. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, or if anybody else has thoughts you might want to pop in.
I don't have experience with that. The one thing I would say is the same idea of meeting with people and determining a timeline and determining, these same concepts can go across, whether it's like specifically team science related or not. Those same ideas do drag across. Most of what we've talked about today goes across any team that's trying to write together, whether they're a science team or not. There are specific needs in science, right? That you have to consider. But I think a lot of these same ideas would apply. I'm not sure if that helps at all.
All right. I see Gary also has another question here about starting templates that we use to start discussions for setting up groups. And so I think that authorship document is one of the points we use, kind of talking through what do you want to work on. For our collaborative writing document, we actually started an outline that we thought was pretty bare bones and basic. And then we had people put in their name next to what did they want to contribute to. So not only their level of contribution to writing, but what topics they wanted to write about. And so, just starting an outline like that. I don't know, we per se have a template, but we can kind of put some of that into the best practices. So I think for some of the questions that we didn't get to, my thought is we're going to put some more information into that best practices document so you guys can all have that. But in the interest of time, I think we're going to need to kind of wrap up here and just thank you all for coming. It's been great to hear some of your thoughts and ideas, get some of your questions. So again, go back to that best practices document because that's where we're going to talk about and add in some information. The authorship document is also really helpful. And so please use those moving forward. And so here is some information about how to reach us. So if you want to contact any of us, please definitely reach out to us individually, as well as go into that best practices document. But we also, because this series today was part of our Accelerating Collaborative Team Science webinar series, we want to just highlight our next one upcoming November 21st at noon Eastern time. And so that's really going to feature a couple of speakers in the science of team science realm and the practice of team science. So there are going to be some really great questions in there addressing some of these main topics. And so I hope that you can all join us in November for our really unique event. So it's going to be called Team Science in Sync, The Experts Explain It All. So if you like what you learned today or would like to be part of these roles in the future, please join this and you can just sign up for the listserv and we will send you information about that. And so then you can join some of our Accelerating Team Science workshops. And as for today, like I said, go back into that best practices document, reach out to any of us if you have specific questions for us. And then hopefully we will be able to send out a recording to anybody who registered. So if you'd like to go back and find some of this info, you'll be able to access it. So thank you all. And thanks to my co-presenters, Brandy and Jess behind the scenes. And I don't know, Brandy, if you want to say a few final words, but I appreciated having everybody here. So thank you.
I was just going to say, if there's something that we haven't answered today, please feel free to reach out to us by email. Also, you can put notes about anything you're wondering in the Easy Retro board. We'll happily start adding things to the best practices document to address those, and we'll make sure the best practices document does go out in a follow-up email along with a recording of this session. So thank you guys very much.
Thank you all. Have a great day.